Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Love, Crimes of Passion series, Episode 1.
Oh, wow. Episode 1.
Yeah, our first deep dive for this series. And today we're diving deep into a case that gripped Mumbai back in 2014.
All right.
The murder of 23-year-old Esther Anuhya.
Oh, goodness.
Imagine you're looking at grainy CCTV footage from a bustling train station.
Yeah.
It's 5 a.m. and a young woman walks out, disappears into the crowd, and is never seen alive again.
Oh.
That's how Esther's story begins.
What's fascinating here is how that very ordinariness, that sense of, this could be anyone, makes it all the more chilling.
Yeah.
It immediately raises the question, could this happen to any of us?
Right. It makes you think twice about those everyday moments we usually take for granted.
Yeah.
But before we get ahead of ourselves,
Sure.
let's rewind. Who was Esther Anuhya?
Yeah.
What brought her to that train station on that fateful morning?
So Esther was a bright, ambitious software engineer from Machilapatnam, Andhra Pradesh.
Yeah.
She had landed her dream job at Tata Consultancy Services in Mumbai. Imagine her excitement. A young woman building a career in the tech world away from home, but she was also deeply connected to her family, the backbone of her family, by all accounts.
And this wasn't some random trip, right?
Yeah.
She was just heading back to Mumbai after spending Christmas with her family.
Right.
A routine journey that turned into a nightmare.
Exactly. She arrived at Lokmanya Tilak Terminus, or LTT, as it's commonly known, on January 4th, 2014.
Okay.
She was supposed to grab a cab to her apartment where she lived with a roommate, but she never made it.
I can't even imagine the agonizing wait for her family and roommate.
Oh, it's awful.
You mentioned speaking to her father earlier. What was that like?
He was incredibly distraught, understandably.
Yeah.
He had spoken to Esther right before she left for Mumbai, and when he couldn't reach her, he knew something was terribly wrong. He immediately filed a missing person report, but those initial hours, days must have been pure torture. Not knowing where your daughter is, hoping against hope that she's okay.
And then after 10 agonizing days of searching, the devastating discovery.
Her body was found on January 13th in a secluded area near Chandrabhan. It was decomposed and partially burned.
Okay, let's unpack this. You've worked on a lot of cases. What goes through your mind when you see that a body has been burned?
Sure.
What does it tell us?
Well, burning a body is often an attempt to destroy evidence.
Right.
Obviously. But it's also a way for the perpetrator to distance themselves from the crime. It's about dehumanizing the victim, making them feel less real, less personal. In this case, I'd go a step further. It wasn't enough to just end her life. He had to erase her, that level of rage that need to obliterate any trace of her existence. It's a chilling glimpse into the mind of the killer.
It sends shivers down my spine just thinking about it.
Yeah.
So obviously at this point, the investigation takes a dramatic turn. What were some of the key pieces of evidence the police started looking at?
Well, forensic evidence was crucial. The autopsy revealed that Esther had been strangled and there were signs of sexual assault. This immediately pointed towards a crime of extreme violence, something far more sinister than just a random act.
And I bet that CCTV footage you mentioned earlier played a big role too, right?
Absolutely. They had footage showing Esther walking out of LTT station with a man.
Okay.
Which strongly suggested that she had been deliberately lured away to make matters worse. All of her belongings, her laptop, her suitcase, everything were missing.
So initially it seems like robbery was the motive.
Right.
Yeah, but you mentioned the brutality of the crime.
Yeah.
Did that raise any red flags for the investigators?
It did. While robbery can sometimes escalate into violence, the level of brutality in this case was excessive. It went far beyond what would typically be necessary to just steal someone's possessions.
Right.
That discrepancy, that level of rage, suggested a more personal motive.
Yeah.
Something darker lurking beneath the surface.
So at this point, you've got a missing young woman, a brutal murder, and a possible motive that doesn't quite add up.
Right.
What did the police do next? How did they track down a suspect?
Well, they started by questioning witnesses, anyone who might have been at the station that morning, anyone who might have seen something. But the real breakthrough came from a combination of the CCTV footage and phone records.
Okay.
Through meticulous analysis, they were able to identify the man who was last seen with Esther Chandrabhan Sanap.
Okay, so they have their prime suspect.
Right.
But what do we know about this guy? Was he just a random opportunist, or did something about his background jump out at the investigators?
When they looked into Sanap's past, what immediately stood out was his history of petty crime, and here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
He wasn't just a regular guy who happened to be at the train station.
Right.
He was there posing as a cab driver, preying on vulnerable travelers like Esther, offering them cheaper fares. It's a classic tactic used by predators exploiting trust and offering something appealing to lower their victim's guard.
You know, it's chilling how textbook that is.
Right.
He's playing on basic human needs, saving money, getting home safe. Think about it.
Yeah.
Have you ever been tempted by a too-good-to-be-true offer, especially when you're tired or vulnerable?
It happens all the time. We want to believe the best in people, especially in situations where we feel a bit out of our element.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Sanap was counting on.
Sadly, it worked. Esther, trusting his offer, got into his cab, but instead of taking her home, he drove her to that deserted area near Conjuremark.
Right.
And that's where her nightmare truly began.
That's right. And what happened next is a horrifying reminder of the dark side of human nature.
Let's dive into that after a quick word from our sponsors.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, Sanap takes Esther to a deserted area instead of her apartment.
And that's when he tries to rob her, and when she resists, he brutally strangles her to death.
Right.
Then to cover his tracks, he sets her body on fire.
It's a chilling sequence of events, and it raises a crucial question. Did the robbery escalate into murder, or was that the plan all along? Was Esther specifically targeted, or was she simply in the wrong place at the wrong time?
That's what investigators had to grapple with. On the surface, it seemed like a robbery gone wrong, but the sheer brutality of the crime, the way he gained her trust, it just left everyone wondering if there was something more, a darker motive at play. Was this just about money, or was there the deeper, more twisted reason behind Esther's murder?
And those questions, was it just robbery? Was there something more? Those became the heart of the trial?
Yeah.
That gripped India?
You're right. The trial of Chandrabhan Sanap became national news. Everyone was glued to the coverage, waiting for justice to be served. What was the prosecution's strategy in presenting their case?
They focused on building a clear narrative, like a puzzle, using the evidence they had gathered.
Okay.
They presented the CCTV footage, the forensic evidence confirming the brutal nature of the crime, and the missing belongings, which initially pointed to robbery.
But as we discussed, the violence seemed way too intense for a typical robbery.
Right.
How did they address that?
The prosecution hammered that point home. They argued that the violence inflicted on Esther went way beyond what was needed for a simple theft.
Yeah.
They suggested there might have been a deeper, more sinister motive.
So they left some room for interpretation, letting the jury connect the dots. Did they specifically address whether this could be considered a crime of passion, considering the series theme?
They didn't explicitly label it as such. Their focus was on proving the brutality of the act, letting the jury draw their own conclusions about Sanap's intentions. They also emphasized Sanap's prior criminal record, portraying him as a habitual offender with a history of violence.
And how did Sanap's defense team try to counter these arguments? Did they try to paint him as someone capable of love, twisted, or otherwise?
Interestingly, no, they went for a more technical approach.
Okay.
They claimed the evidence was circumstantial. It didn't definitively prove Sanap's guilt. They argued the CCTV footage only showed Esther getting into the cab, not the actual murder. They said the missing belongings could have been stolen by someone else later.
So a classic reasonable doubt defense. How convincing were they?
Well, the jury didn't buy it after a closely watched trial in 2015. Chandrabhan Sanap was convicted of both rape and murder.
Wow, that must have been a huge victory for the prosecution, and a small measure of relief for Esther's family, who had been waiting for justice for so long.
It was a bittersweet moment, for sure. Nothing could bring Esther back, but the verdict provided some sense of closure and reaffirmed that the legal system could at times deliver justice in such horrific cases.
Right.
And the court didn't hold back. Sanap was sentenced to death for his crimes.
The death penalty in this case, it seems the court felt it was the only fitting punishment. What was the public reaction to the verdict?
There was a huge sense of relief, especially in Mumbai. Many saw it as a triumph for justice, a message that such brutal crimes would not go unpunished. But of course, the death penalty is a very complex issue with strong opinions on both sides.
Absolutely. And even with the conviction and sentencing, Esther's case didn't end there. Right. There's always the aftermath.
You're absolutely right. In India, death penalty cases go through a lengthy appeals process, which can take years, even decades, to be fully resolved. Sanap's case is no different. His lawyers appealed immediately, challenging both the verdict and the sentence, and those appeals are still ongoing.
So while justice was served, in a sense, there's still a long road ahead, and for Esther's family, this ongoing process means their journey toward healing is far from over.
Exactly. They have to live with the pain of their loss, knowing the man who took their daughter's life is still alive fighting to avoid his punishment.
Right.
It highlights the limitations of the legal system. While it aims to deliver justice, it doesn't always provide the emotional closure families desperately need.
You're right.
Yeah.
But Esther's case had a ripple effect that went far beyond the courtroom. It ignited a public conversation, especially around women's safety. What were some of the key issues that came to light?
Esther's murder sparked a wave of fear and anger across India. Her story resonated with countless women who faced the daily reality of navigating public spaces with a sense of vulnerability. People demanded better security at transportation hubs, more police patrols, stricter regulations for cab drivers.
Especially in a city like Mumbai, where millions rely on public transportation.
Right.
The fear was palpable.
Yes, and it wasn't just about physical safety. There was also a deeper conversation about societal attitudes towards women, the need to challenge deep-rooted biases that contribute to their vulnerability.
Yeah.
We saw debates about victim blaming, the tendency to question women's choices instead of holding perpetrators accountable.
It's so frustrating, right?
It is.
The focus should be on preventing these crimes from happening in the first place, not on telling women how to avoid becoming victims.
Absolutely. Esther's case brought all these issues to the forefront. It forced people to acknowledge that women shouldn't have to live in fear, constantly modifying their behavior to stay safe.
So in a way, Esther's tragic death became a catalyst for change. Did anything positive come out of this?
Amidst the outrage and grief, there was a glimmer of hope. Esther's case inspired a wave of activism and advocacy for women's safety across India. New initiatives were launched, awareness campaigns gained momentum, and there was a renewed push for stricter laws and better enforcement.
It's heartbreaking that it takes a tragedy like this to spark real change.
It is.
But it's also a testament to Esther's legacy, the impact she continues to have even after her death.
Her story became a symbol, a rallying cry for a safer India for women. But even with all the progress, there are still unanswered questions, things that haunt both investigators and Esther's family.
Like what specifically remains unresolved?
For one, there's the question of whether Sanap acted alone or had accomplices the brutality of the crime. The calculated disposal of her body has led some to believe he might have had help.
And on a broader level, there's the question of whether Esther's death could have been prevented. Could better security at LTT, more vigilant police patrols, or even greater awareness among passengers have made a difference? Those are tough questions, and it's hard to say for sure, but they're important to ask because they force us to confront the bigger picture, the systemic failures that allow these tragedies to happen.
Yeah, it's so easy to get caught up in the details of a case.
Right.
The who and the how, but we also need to ask why was Esther vulnerable in the first place? Why wasn't there adequate security to protect her? These questions challenge us to think about the kind of society we're creating, the values we prioritize.
You're right. It's a reminder that we can't just focus on punishing the perpetrators. We have to address the root causes, the societal norms and attitudes that make women targets.
Exactly, and it goes beyond policy changes and security measures.
Right.
It's about fostering a culture of respect, empathy, and accountability. It's about challenging those harmful biases, those whispers of victim blaming that often silence women and prevent them from seeking help.
It's about creating a world where Esther and countless others like her can travel freely, pursue their dreams, and live without fear. It's a massive undertaking, but it's one we can't afford to ignore.
Absolutely. And as we wrap up our deep dive into this heartbreaking case, it's important to remember Esther not just as a victim, but as a vibrant, ambitious young woman who had her whole life ahead of her.
She had a loving family, a promising career. She was someone's daughter, someone's friend, and her story, as tragic as it is, serves as a powerful reminder that we need to do better to be better.
It's a call to action for all of us to speak up against injustice, to challenge those harmful attitudes, and to support organizations working towards a safer and more equitable society for women.
It's about recognizing that even small actions can have a ripple effect. By being more aware, by standing up for what's right, by demanding change, we can collectively contribute to creating a world where tragedies like this become less and less frequent.
And as we move forward, let's carry Esther's memory with us. Let her story be a catalyst for change, a reminder that we can't be complacent when it comes to safety and equality.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the tragic case of Esther Anuhya. It's been a heavy but essential conversation. If you found this episode insightful, consider following and subscribing to CrimePod Castle for more deep dives into true crime cases. We'll be back soon with another episode exploring a new case that's sure to keep you on the edge of your seat. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and as always, stay vigilant.